William did not issue a carefully worded statement expressing concern. They did not manage the situation from a distance. In the middle of the night, they physically left Adelaide Cottage with 3 sleeping children. The reason still feels wrong when you sit with it. There was no visible threat at the gates, no alarms triggered by someone climbing a wall. What forced them out had been sitting directly beneath their youngest son's bedroom for 2 years, undetected by the security teams who constantly sweep the property, the engineers who signed off on the building, and the people whose entire professional lives are spent knowing every inch of that estate. 2 years, that number refuses to settle. Once you understand what was actually found under the floorboards, the episode stops looking like a routine royal security scare and becomes something else entirely. It begins with the house itself. When William and Catherine announced the move to Adelaide Cottage in 2022, the British press treated it as a lifestyle decision. A smaller home, fewer staff, more outdoor space, a deliberate step back from palace machinery so their children could experience something closer to ordinary. That framing missed the point. This was not simple downsizing. It was 2 parents who had thought hard about the kind of childhood they wanted for George, Charlotte, and Louis. They turned down larger, more prestigious properties on the Windsor estate specifically to take this one. Adelaide Cottage offered gardens instead of formal galleries. It had a kitchen where Catherine cooked real walnut dinners and birthday cakes, the kind of domestic rhythm that does not exist inside a palace staffed by dozens. The bedrooms gave the children doors that closed and a sense that life had edges and a measure of privacy. They sacrificed convenience and status to live there. That choice is central to everything that followed, because what was later taken from them was not just a building. It was a carefully constructed plan for raising 3 children inside an impossible public life. The discovery began as ordinary maintenance. Structural engineers arrived with clipboards and instruments to examine the foundations of an old building, the kind of routine work that happens constantly on properties like this. Nothing on the work order suggested anything unusual. 17 minutes in, the evening stopped being routine. Beneath Adelaide Cottage runs a network of passages older than the cottage itself. Some sections date to the English Civil War in the 1640s. Every survey had missed them. Every security sweep had missed them. Official records going back decades contain no mention, no footnote, no question mark. Centuries-old stone corridors lay under one of the most scrutinized properties in Britain, and no one on the payroll knew they existed. Tunnels alone would have been an infrastructure problem. Seal the entrances, update the archives, close the file. Old stone does not threaten anyone. The problem was what the engineers found inside them. At 1:45, infrared sensors registered movement in a place where nothing should have been moving. William woke first. A decade of military training had altered how he slept. The slight change in air pressure as protection officers began working the lower corridors was enough to pull him awake. Catherine woke moments later, the way mothers do before a word is spoken. Neither spoke. People who have lived their adult lives under constant observation learn that in the first minute of a crisis, listening yields more than questions. Knock was soft but persistent. William opened the door to Mucker's Hudler, head of their personal protection unit. 3 officers stood in the corridor behind him. Hudler's face had already delivered the message. He told them the structural team had found evidence of recent human activity in the spaces beneath the house, not decades old, but recent and repeated. Tools without rust, footprints in dust that had not yet settled, empty water bottles with purchase dates from the previous month. A clean folding chair, a thermal blanket, and photographs, recent images of the family going about ordinary days, taken from angles that showed the photographer knew their schedule and their movements. Someone had been sitting under the house while the family slept above it and had been doing so for some time. Hudler put it to William in 5 words. Sources close to that corridor say William repeated them to himself. They were under the house, not at the gate, not over the wall, not in the trees with a long lens, under the floor of the room where his children slept. Catherine was already moving toward the children's rooms before the briefing finished. She did not wait for more detail. The moment she understood the question concerned her children's safety, she left the hallway. The evacuation had to be fast. George, Charlotte, and Louis needed to be woken gently, dressed, and moved to a secure location while investigators map the full extent of what lay beneath their bedrooms. Catherine has spent years constructing a public image defined by composure. That composure slipped a fraction, revealing the woman who filters every major decision through one question: what happens to those 3 children? William stood in the doorway watching her move from bed to bed. Her voice stayed low and steady as she told 3 confused children they were going on a midnight adventure. George, 11 and already aware that his family carries complications other families never meet. Charlotte, 9, sharper than many adults credit. She asked the question that cut through the story her mother was building: "Are we safe here, Mum?" Catherine paused for half a second. William saw it from the doorway and understood exactly what that pause cost her. The evacuation ran clean. Security teams rehearsed these scenarios constantly and spend their careers hoping never to use them. 3 vehicles waited with engines running and routes already agreed. Emergency bags, updated 4 times a year and stored where no one has to search for them at midnight, had already been pulled. That detail alone shows what life looks like underneath the ordinary days of that family, permanently one incident away from needing to leave. William carried 6-year-old Louis down the stairs, still half asleep against his shoulder. Catherine followed with a hand on each of the older 2. The image that lingers is of a woman standing on her own gravel drive in the November cold, coat pulled over what she had gone to bed in, one of her son's shoes in her hand because it had come off on the stairs, smiling down at 3 frightened children so they would not see the fear on the faces of the men standing around her in the dark. The Princess of Wales being moved out of her own home. Before she got into the car, she turned for one last look at the house: warm windows, a family home standing still in the dark, a building that had once been a deliberate decision, now something she no longer recognized. William's hand found hers, and they left. By dawn, white forensic tents stood on the lawns, each positioned over a separate entrance to the tunnel network. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Wright took the call just after midnight. She was brought in for her record on historical property crime and a security clearance that allowed her to work inside the specific legal framework surrounding the family. Her team used ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging. The map they produced was worse than expected. The passages did not stop beneath Adelaide Cottage. They continued, connecting to Windsor Castle itself and to 4 other properties on the estate, including Frogmore Cottage and Royal Lodge. For years, and possibly far longer, there had been a way of moving around the entire Windsor estate that bypassed every gate, checkpoint, camera, and system designed by people whose professional lives are spent imagining how someone might reach that family. No one on the payroll knew it existed. The tunnels themselves could have been contained. The escalation to a national security incident came from the evidence of how recently and regularly the passages had been used. In one chamber, sitting directly beneath the bedroom where Prince Louis sleeps 20 feet above, investigators found a camp, a chair, a blanket, enough water for extended stays, and more photographs, not random images. A curated selection focused on the school run, Catherine's morning route across the estate, and the precise window each day when the protection detail changes shift and the ground goes quieter. Nobody stumbles into that pattern. It is research conducted with the patience of a professional. 2 years, that is the number the story has been building toward. In chambers reachable only by crawling through gaps barely wide enough for a grown man, search teams found older camps and items dating back close to 2 years, 2 winters, 2 Christmases with the tree in the window, 2 summers of children playing in the garden. Parallel to every ordinary day, a man had been lying in the dark, writing in notebooks. The journals emerged in poor condition and went straight to transcribers. The handwriting grew progressively harder to read, mapping a gradual descent away from the surface world. Catherine's reaction to the full briefing was the controlled fury of a mother told that the one boundary she believed still existed had never been there. She had long accepted the public dimensions of her life, the cameras, the commentary on her appearance, her choices, her parenting. That was a cost she had calculated and agreed to pay. This was different in kind. A man had been underneath her sleeping children for 2 years, watching and planning something no one could yet name. By the end of the first evening, the forensics team had a digital trail. a moderator on an online forum devoted to royal history, had flagged a series of posts that had worried him for a year and a half. The account operated under the name Windsor Truth Seeker and detailed theories about treasure buried beneath royal properties, complete with maps that closely matched documents now sitting in evidence bags. Psychologist Miranda Foster, a specialist in obsessive behavior and one-sided attachments to public figures, mapped the digital footprint. The progression followed a pattern she had documented for 20 years. Interest becomes study, study becomes theory, theory becomes grievance. Somewhere along that line, a person stops being someone reading about a royal family and becomes the main character in a story in which the royal family is personally withholding something from him. The name that emerged was Malcolm Hundrux, 47, formerly a curator at a small historical society in Kent. Colleagues had watched him grow progressively more erratic over a year before the society let him go 3 years before any of this. After that, he had no job and gave every day to the obsession. What made him dangerous rather than merely pitiable was competence. He could read 17th century architectural plans. He knew how to work an archive without leaving a trail. He had the training to locate a door that had fallen off official records 400 years earlier, and he had nothing else in his life. He came to believe the Wales family stood between him and a discovery that would restore his professional reputation. 3 children asleep in a cottage became, in the story he told himself underground, an obstacle. The journals confirmed the pattern. Hundrux spent 8 and 10 hours at a stretch in the tunnels. He wrote that he preferred it. The dark and the silence suited him. He felt closer to the history he was hunting than he ever had in a reading room. Entries about the family began as clinical observation, times, routines, weather, movements, then shifted. He began writing about them with the familiarity and assumed intimacy that belongs only to people who have shared something real. He had built relationships in his head with a woman and 3 children who did not know he existed, constructed entirely from photographs taken through a lens from a place they could not see. William read the psychological assessment and understood the shape of the problem at once. Sensors and cameras do not solve this. A man who gave 2 years of his life to living underneath a house is not a man who reads a news report about police finding his camp and simply returns to ordinary life. Hundrux was still out there. King Charles received his briefing at Clarence House. In front of staff, he kept his expression still. On the phone to his son shortly afterward, sources suggest he did not. The news landed with particular force because of history. In 1982, Michael Fergun walked into Buckingham Palace, reached the Queen's bedroom, and sat on the end of her bed, a breach that has haunted royal security planning for 4 decades. More recently, in 2021, a man carrying a crossbow climbed into the grounds of Windsor Castle on Christmas Day. Both men came over the wall. Everything the palace has built since Fergun is designed around people coming over the wall. This one came from underneath. There is a second reason the news hit Charles the way it did, and it has a name the family rarely speaks aloud. The last time this family lost control of who was pointing a camera at them, it ended in a tunnel in Paris in August 1997 and a funeral at Westminster Abbey 6 days later. Charles walked behind that coffin with 2 boys, 15 and 12. 30 years on, his son rang him at midnight to say a stranger had been photographing his grandchildren from a hole in the ground. The photographs, the tunnel, the loss of control over a lens, no one on that call needed to say her name. The children absorbed the disruption in different ways. Louis VI had nightmares about monsters in the ground. His mind turned a midnight evacuation into the only story a child that age could invent. Catherine sat with him night after night, explaining that the ground is only ground. Charlotte began checking doors and windows, then checking them again, a 9-year-old confirming every night that locks were turned. Her mother watched and did not stop her, understanding that Charlotte needed the ritual. George went quiet, studying his parents' faces for the worry they tried to hide. He asked about the investigation with a precision that told William exactly where his mind had been going at night. Eventually, William found him standing at a window overlooking Kensington Gardens, shoulders squared. The sight went through William like a current because he had seen that photograph of himself, a boy at a window already learning the weight of what was coming. The conversation between them was short and honest. William had decided years earlier that he would not give his children the emotional distance he had grown up with. They could bring him a fear without having to navigate a household to reach him. That promise was tested by an 11-year-old asking whether the man was still out there. He answered honestly, the way he had promised himself he would. Footage analysis kept returning one man, late 40s, appearing near Adelaide Cottage too often for coincidence. His vehicle led investigators to a rented cottage 3 miles from Windsor. Officers found it empty, left in a hurry but not carelessly. He had taken what mattered. Somehow within hours of the discovery, he had known his tunnels had been opened, and he was gone. The manhunt used resources normally reserved for counter-terrorism. Hundrux possessed detailed knowledge of royal properties, professional-grade surveillance equipment, and 2 years underground building towards something no one could yet name. The uncertainty alone justified the scale of the response. A nationwide alert, a public appeal, 6 months of digital forensics produced nothing. He had prepared for discovery the same way he prepared everything else. The cottage revealed research extending well beyond Windsor, detailed work on Sandringham and Balmoral. He was not finished. Dr. Foster's updated assessment put a chill through the investigation. Isolation, obsession, and a significant public humiliation, losing the tunnels counted as one, tend to push a person from watching toward acting. He had been watching for 2 years. No one wanted to say aloud what might come next. 3 weeks after the evacuation, William and Catherine arrived at a conversation they had both been avoiding. The upgrades at Adelaide Cottage were real and necessary, every tunnel entrance sealed with sensors, additional cameras, facial recognition, the full architecture of an overhaul, all of it correct. None of it solved the real problem. The problem was knowledge. You can seal stone. You cannot unseal a memory. Every room, kitchen, sitting room, bedrooms, was now a room that had contained 2 years of a man lying in the dark beneath it. The garden where 3 children played had a different geography, running 20 feet further down than any of them had known. Catherine walked through the cottage alone before leaving for the last time. The kitchen, where she had made birthday cakes and walnut dinners. The sitting room where film nights had become a family institution. The bedrooms where 3 children had grown from Barbies into people with opinions and arguments. None of it erased, all of it altered. Adelaide Cottage had been an answer to a question she and William asked before George was born, whether children could be raised royal without being raised only royal. That question now looked, in her own word, naive. The guilt made no logical sense and would not leave. William walked the rooms like an engineer, necessary work, all signed off, but he understood the upgrades would change what the place was. Safer and more monitored than ever, it would feel like everywhere else they had ever lived. Whether either of them would want to walk back through that door was a question neither put into words. The statement to the press used 11 words. The Prince and Princess of Wales are relocating to allow for comprehensive infrastructure and security work at Adelaide Cottage. By evening, it was everywhere. Front pages, rolling coverage, photographers filming an empty driveway in the rain. Members of the public came and stood at the gates with flowers, because that is what the country does when it does not know what else to do. A thread runs through the entire story, and it has a name. Diana used to take her boys out at night to a fast food place, into a car with no royal crest, anywhere the job could not reach them for an hour. She spent her life followed by men with cameras and died with a camera pointed at the car. Her son bought a small house with a garden so his own children would never learn that weight. He carried his own child down the stairs in the dark and out into the November cold because a man with a lens had found him anyway from underneath. Same staircase feeling, same 2 arms. The job found him anyway. Malcolm Hundrux never found his treasure. There is no gold under Windsor. There never was, only old stone, water, and 400 years of forgotten paperwork, none of it worth what he spent chasing it. He gave up his career, 2 years of his life, and whatever remained of his mind after the journals and the hours alone in the dark. The only thing he successfully removed from the Windsor estate was a family's belief that they were safe in their own beds. He is still out there, still convinced, in all likelihood, that he is the wronged party. What he actually is a man who took 3 children's home away from them and found nothing. The story leaves no clean resolution. Hundrux has not been found. Adelaide Cottage stands empty behind security upgrades that turned it into exactly the kind of place William and Catherine were trying to leave behind. Three children are navigating the knowledge that the ordinary childhood built so carefully for them had a flaw they never knew about. Charlotte checks the doors. Louis asks when they are going back to their real house. George stands at windows with squared shoulders and his father's face. On Christmas Eve, William and Catherine stood together at a window after the children were finally asleep, talking about spring, where they would be living, what it would look like. Neither said the obvious thing, that Adelaide Cottage is probably finished for them, not lost to a threat with a name, but lost to knowing. The tunnels can be sealed, the sensors can go in, every item on the list can be signed off. The knowledge stays. This is not a story about a break-in. It is a story about the thing no security upgrade can reach. The question it asks is one every parent understands, whether they live in a palace or an ordinary house on an ordinary street. How do you put something back in the box once your children know it is there?